Wealthy CEO's daughter only eats the food of a poor black woman. Then he married her instantly. The crystal chandelier cast dancing shadows across the marble floor as Salvatore Bellini paced his study, his phone pressed against his ear. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows of his Lake Como estate, the Italian sun painted the water in shades of gold, but the beauty was lost on him. His 6-year-old daughter hadn't eaten in 3 days. "What do you mean there's nothing more you can do?" Salvatore's voice carried the edge of desperation he'd been fighting for months. Dr. Rossetti, Italy's most renowned pediatric psychiatrist, had just delivered another crushing blow. "Mr. Bellini, we've tried everything. Behavioral therapy, medication, even hypnosis. Bianca simply refuses to eat. Her body is rejecting nourishment on a psychological level that we don't fully understand." Salvatore's hand clenched around the phone. 2 years ago, his world had shattered when his wife Elena died in a car accident. But watching his daughter waste away, meal by meal, day by day, was a torture beyond anything he'd imagined. The vibrant little girl who once filled their home with laughter had become a ghost, silent and hollow-eyed. "There has to be something," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I've hired the world's best chefs, Michelin-starred cooks from Paris, molecular gastronomists from Tokyo, comfort food specialists from New York. She won't even look at the food." Through the study's open door, he could see Bianca curled up on the living room sofa, her small frame lost in an oversized sweater. Her dark hair, once glossy like her mother's, hung limp around her pale face. The sight made his chest tighten with helpless rage. "Perhaps," Dr. Rossetti said carefully, "you should consider that this isn't about the food itself. Children who've experienced trauma often use eating as a form of control when they feel powerless. So what am I supposed to do, watch her disappear?" The silence on the other end spoke volumes. Salvatore ended the call and sank into his leather chair, burying his face in his hands. Outside, the late afternoon sun began its descent behind the mountains, and he realized he'd spent another day failing his daughter. That evening, as Bianca picked listlessly at a plate of her former favorite pasta, Salvatore made a decision that would change everything. He pulled out his phone and began typing a message that would soon go viral across social media platforms worldwide. "My name is Salvatore Bellini. My 6-year-old daughter has stopped eating. The world's best doctors and chefs have failed. I'm offering €1,000,000 to anyone who can help her find her appetite again. Please share this. A father's desperation knows no bounds." Within hours, the post had been shared thousands of times. His phone buzzed constantly with messages from cranks, genuine well-wishers and opportunists, but buried in the avalanche of responses was one that would change their lives forever. Across the world, in a cramped hostel room in Rome, Zariah Monroe scrolled through her phone as she ate instant ramen for the 3rd night in a row. At 27, she'd been backpacking across Europe for 6 months, working odd jobs in restaurant kitchens to fund her journey. Her grandmother's cast-iron skillet, carefully wrapped in a towel, sat in her worn backpack like a talisman from home. The video of the little Italian girl stopped her cold. Bianca's hollow eyes reminded Zariah of herself at that age, after her parents died, and she'd gone to live with Grandma May in rural Georgia. She remembered the months when food had lost all meaning, when nothing could fill the void left by loss. But she also remembered the day Grandma May had cooked her first meal with love instead of obligation. The way the smell of cornbread and black-eyed peas had somehow awakened something in her that had gone dormant. The way her grandmother's hands, weathered from years of hard work, had moved with such care as she prepared each dish. "That baby needs more than food," Zariah whispered to the empty room. "She needs love." Without allowing herself to think too hard about the impossibility of it all, Zariah packed her few belongings and caught the first train to Lake Como. The Bellini estate rose from the lakeside, like something from a fairy tale, all cream-colored stone and elegant arches. Ancient olive trees dotted the manicured grounds, and Zariah could see why wealthy people from around the world came here to escape reality. But as she approached the imposing iron gates, her confidence wavered. "Excuse me," she called to the uniformed guard, her southern accent thick with nervousness. "I'm here about the little girl, Bianca." The guard looked her up and down, taking in her worn jeans, simple white t-shirt, and the battered backpack slung over her shoulder. His expression shifted from boredom to barely concealed disdain. "You and about 100 other people today. Mr. Bellini isn't seeing anyone else. Especially not—" He caught himself before finishing the sentence, but Zariah heard the unspoken words anyway. "Especially not what?" she asked, her voice steady despite the familiar sting of prejudice. "Especially not someone who looks like me." The guard's face reddened. "Look, miss, Mr. Bellini is a very busy man. He doesn't have time for every tourist who thinks they can help." Zariah reached into her backpack and pulled out her grandmother's skillet, its black surface seasoned to a perfect shine. "Tell him I have something that belonged to a woman who never let a child go hungry. Tell him I understand what it means to lose your appetite for life." Something in her tone must have reached him, because after a moment's hesitation the guard picked up his phone. Salvatore had been expecting another disappointment when his head of security called about the American woman at the gate. All day, he'd endured a parade of celebrity chefs, food bloggers, and attention seekers, each claiming they could succeed where others had failed. But when Marco described the woman with the cast-iron skillet, something made him pause. "Send her up," he said wearily, "but make it quick." When Zariah walked into his study 20 minutes later, Salvatore felt his preconceptions stumble. She moved with quiet confidence, her dark skin glowing against the white marble and gold accents of the room, but it was her eyes that caught him off guard, deep brown and filled with a compassion that seemed to see straight through him. "Mr. Bellini," she said, extending her hand, "I'm Zariah Monroe. Thank you for seeing me." "Miss Monroe." He shook her hand, noting the calluses that spoke of hard work. "I understand you think you can help my daughter." "I don't think anything," Zariah replied honestly. "But I know what it's like to lose your appetite for living, and I know what it takes to find it again." Salvatore studied her for a long moment. She wasn't what he'd expected. No grand claims, no celebrity credentials, just quiet certainty and something else he couldn't quite identify. "Every chef in Europe has failed," he said. "What makes you different?" "I don't cook food, Mr. Bellini. I cook love." The simple statement hung in the air between them. Salvatore felt something shift in his chest, a recognition he couldn't explain. Before he could respond, a small voice interrupted from the doorway. "Papa?" Bianca stood at the threshold, her thin frame dwarfed by the ornate doorframe. But for the first time in weeks, she wasn't looking at the floor. Her dark eyes, so much like her mother's, were focused on Zariah with curious intensity. Zariah's heart clenched at the sight of the little girl. She'd seen the photos, but in person, Bianca's frailty was even more pronounced. Yet there was something else there too, a spark of intelligence that hadn't been dimmed by grief. "Hello, beautiful," Zariah said softly, crouching down to Bianca's level. "I'm Zariah. I've come a very long way to meet you." Bianca tilted her head. "Why?" "Because sometimes, when we're very sad, we forget how good things can taste. I thought maybe I could help you remember. The doctors said I'm sick. You're not sick, sweetheart, you're grieving. There's a difference." Salvatore watched this exchange with growing amazement. Bianca hadn't spoken this many words to a stranger in months. Usually she hid behind him whenever visitors came to the house. "What would you cook?" Bianca asked, taking a small step into the room. Zariah smiled. "What did your mama used to make you?" Bianca's face clouded. "I don't remember." "That's okay. My grandmama always said that the best meals aren't about remembering the past. They're about making new memories." Zariah stood slowly, keeping her movements gentle. "Would you like to help me cook something special?" For the first time in months, Bianca nodded. An hour later, the Bellini kitchen, usually the domain of professional chefs and careful protocol, had been transformed. Zariah had politely dismissed the hovering staff and taken over the enormous space with the easy confidence of someone who'd learned to cook in much humbler surroundings. Salvatore watched from the doorway as she moved around the kitchen, pulling ingredients from the well-stocked pantry. Her grandmother's cast-iron skillet sat prominently on the marble island, looking completely out of place among the state-of-the-art appliances. yet somehow perfectly at home. "What are you making?" he asked. "Soul food," Zariah replied, mixing cornmeal with buttermilk. "Not the fancy kind you see in restaurants, the real kind, the kind that feeds your heart as much as your belly." Bianca sat perched on a bar stool, watching every movement with fascination. "What's soul food?" "It's what my people created when we had nothing but scraps and determination," Zariah explained, her hands working the cornbread batter with practiced ease. "When you can't afford expensive ingredients, you learn to cook with love instead. Every dish tells a story of survival and hope." As the cornbread went into the oven, Zariah began preparing black-eyed peas, her movements rhythmic and sure. The kitchen filled with aromas that were completely foreign to the Italian household, yet somehow comforting. "My grandmama always said that food is just ingredients until you add your story to it," Zariah continued, her voice taking on the cadence of someone sharing ancestral wisdom. "These peas, they're not just vegetables. They're a reminder that even the humblest things can sustain us." She started on the catfish, seasoning it with spices she'd brought from America. The oil heated in her grandmother's skillet with a satisfying sizzle. "Can I help?" Bianca asked quietly. "Of course, baby girl, come wash your hands." Salvatore's breath caught as he watched his daughter slide off the stool and pad over to the sink. She'd been refusing to participate in anything for months, but something about Zariah's presence had sparked life back into her. As the meal came together, the kitchen filled with a warmth that had nothing to do with the cooking. Zariah told stories as she worked, tales of her grandmother's garden in Georgia, of learning to cook on a wood-burning stove, of Sunday dinners that brought the whole community together. "Food is love made visible," she said as she plated the simple meal. "That's what my grandmama taught me." The aroma that rose from the plates was unlike anything the sophisticated kitchen had ever produced. It was earthy, honest, and somehow comforting in a way that transcended culture and background. Bianca approached the table slowly, her eyes wide. She hadn't voluntarily sat down for a meal in weeks. Zariah didn't push, simply placed a small portion on a child-sized plate and sat down herself. "It smells different," Bianca observed. "Different how?" Like love." The words hung in the air like a prayer. Salvatore felt his throat tighten as he watched his daughter pick up a fork for the first time in days. She took a small bite of cornbread, chewed slowly, then looked up at Zariah with wonder. "It tastes like hugs." Tears sprang to Zariah's eyes. "That's exactly what it's supposed to taste like." Bianca took another bite, then another. For the first time in months, she cleaned her plate. When she asked for seconds, Salvatore had to excuse himself to hide his emotions. That evening, after Bianca had gone to bed with a full stomach and the first genuine smile he'd seen in months, Salvatore found Zariah on the terrace overlooking the lake. She stood at the stone railing, her silhouette elegant against the star-filled sky. "I don't know how to thank you," he said, joining her at the railing. "You don't need to thank me. Seeing that baby eat was thanks enough." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, the gentle lapping of the lake providing a peaceful soundtrack. Salvatore found himself studying her profile, noting the strength in her jawline, the gentle curve of her lips. "Tell me about your grandmother," he said finally. Zariah's face softened. "Grandmama May raised me after my parents died in a car accident when I was 8. We didn't have much money, but she made sure I never felt poor. She taught me that you can create magic in the kitchen if you cook with intention." "She sounds like a remarkable woman." "She was. She died 2 years ago, and I've been kind of lost ever since. That's why I'm traveling, trying to figure out who I am without her guidance." The parallel wasn't lost on either of them. Both had lost the women who'd anchored their worlds. Both had been adrift in grief. "Bianca hasn't eaten a full meal since her mother died," Salvatore admitted. "Elena used to cook with her every Sunday. Simple things, pasta, risotto, fresh bread. After the accident, Bianca refused everything. Even her favorite foods became reminders of what she'd lost." "Grief changes the taste of everything," Zariah said softly. "I remember after Grandmama passed, food lost all meaning. It was just fuel to keep going. What changed? Time. And learning that honoring someone's memory doesn't mean staying stuck in sadness. Grandmama wouldn't have wanted me to stop eating. She would have wanted me to keep cooking, keep sharing love through food. Salvatore turned to look at her directly. Stay. What? Stay here. Be Bianca's cook. I'll pay you whatever you want. Zariah shook her head. Mr. Bellini, I appreciate the offer, but I'm not looking for charity. It's not charity. You gave me back my daughter tonight. That's worth more than money. I can't accept payment for caring about a child. Then don't do it for money. Do it because she needs you. The next morning, Zariah woke in a guest bedroom that was larger than her entire grandmother's house. Sunlight streamed through sheer curtains, casting everything in a golden glow. For a moment, she wondered if the previous day had been a dream. A soft knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. Zariah? Bianca's voice was tentative but hopeful. Are you going to make breakfast? Any doubts Zariah had about staying evaporated. She opened the door to find Bianca dressed and ready for the day, her eyes brighter than they'd been in the photos. Good morning, beautiful. What would you like to eat? Can we make pancakes? Mama used to make them on Saturdays. Zariah felt her heart squeeze. Of course we can, but these will be special pancakes, Georgia style. In the kitchen, Zariah taught Bianca how to make fluffy buttermilk pancakes from scratch, letting the little girl crack eggs and measure ingredients. As they worked, Bianca began to open up, sharing memories of her mother that came flooding back with each familiar motion. Mama always let me pour the batter, she said, concentrating hard as she ladled the mixture onto the griddle. Your mama sounds like she was a very special cook. She was. She said cooking was how we show people we love them. Your mama was right. When Salvatore appeared in the kitchen doorway, still in his pajamas, and looking more relaxed than he had in months, he found his daughter chattering happily as she flipped pancakes with Zariah's guidance. Papa, look what I made. The pride in her voice was unmistakable. Salvatore felt a lump form in his throat as he realized this was the first time since Elena's death that Bianca had wanted to share an accomplishment with him. Over the next few weeks, Zariah settled into a routine at the villa. Each morning, she and Bianca would plan the day's meals together, often incorporating Italian ingredients into southern recipes. The fusion created unexpected flavors that delighted them both. But it wasn't just about the food. Zariah became the steady, nurturing presence Bianca had been missing. She read bedtime stories, braided the little girl's hair, and listened patiently to rambling tales about school and friends and dreams. Slowly, Salvatore found himself drawn into their orbit. He began joining them for meals, then for cooking lessons, then for evening walks around the estate grounds. Zariah challenged him in ways he hadn't expected, questioning his assumptions about parenting and success and what truly mattered in life. You work too much, she told him one evening as they watched Bianca chase fireflies in the garden. I have responsibilities. To who? Your daughter needs you here, not in some boardroom. The fashion house requires... The fashion house will survive. Your relationship with Bianca might not. Her directness should have annoyed him. Instead, he found it refreshing. No one in his life spoke to him with such honest concern. In Georgia, Zariah continued, we have a saying, you can't love someone from a distance. Money and success don't mean anything if you're not present for the people who need you. That night, Salvatore made his first significant change. He began working from home 3 days a week, scheduling his meetings around Bianca's needs rather than the other way around. The transformation in their family dynamic was remarkable. Bianca bloomed under the combined attention of her father and Zariah. She gained weight, laughed more, and began making plans for the future again. But as the weeks turned into months, something else began to bloom as well. The attraction between Salvatore and Zariah grew quietly, built on shared concern for Bianca and deepening respect for each other. It manifested in small moments, the brush of fingers when passing dishes, the way Salvatore's eyes lingered on Zariah when she wasn't looking, the comfortable silence they shared during late-night conversations after Bianca was asleep. One evening, as autumn painted the lake in shades of gold and crimson, they found themselves alone on the terrace while Bianca played in her room. "I've been thinking," Salvatore said, his voice uncharacteristically uncertain. "About what?" "About us. About what this is becoming." Zariah's pulse quickened, but she kept her voice steady. "What do you think it's becoming?" "Something I didn't expect. Something I'm not sure I'm ready for." She turned to face him fully. "And what would that be?" "Love," he said simply. "I think I'm falling in love with you, Zariah." The confession hung between them like a bridge neither was sure they should cross. Zariah felt her heart racing as she looked into his dark eyes, seeing vulnerability she hadn't expected from the powerful businessman. "Salvatore," she began, "I know it's complicated. I know we come from different worlds. But what I feel for you, it's not gratitude or convenience. It's real." "It's real for me too," she admitted softly. "But we have to think about Bianca. She's been through so much loss. If this doesn't work out, then we make sure it works out." He stepped closer, his hands framing her face with infinite gentleness. "You brought my daughter back to life, Zariah, but you did something else too. You reminded me what it feels like to hope." When he kissed her, it was with the reverence of a man who'd thought he'd never love again. Zariah melted into his embrace, letting herself believe for the first time since her grandmother's death that she might have found a place to belong. Their relationship deepened over the following weeks, but they were careful to maintain normalcy for Bianca's sake. The little girl, however, seemed to sense the change in energy around the house and appeared delighted by it. "Are you going to marry Zariah, Papa?" she asked one morning over breakfast, with the blunt curiosity of childhood. Salvatore nearly choked on his coffee. "Where did that come from?" "You look at her the way you used to look at Mama, and she makes you happy. Out of the mouths of babes." Salvatore glanced at Zariah, who was trying to hide her smile behind her coffee cup. "Would that be okay with you?" he asked his daughter carefully. Bianca considered this seriously. "Will she keep cooking for us?" "I think that's a safe assumption." "And will she keep reading me stories?" "I'm sure she will." "Then yes, but I want to help pick out her dress." Zariah laughed, the sound like music in the morning sunlight. "I think we might be getting a little ahead of ourselves." But privately, she found herself imagining what it would be like to officially become part of this family she'd grown to love so deeply. The fantasy came crashing down 3 weeks later when the first paparazzi photos appeared. Salvatore had taken Zariah and Bianca to Milan for the day, a simple family outing to the Children's Museum and lunch at a sidewalk cafe. They'd been careful about public appearances, but someone had recognized him and begun taking photos. The tabloid headlines were brutal. "Bellini's mystery woman, gold digger, or true love." "Italian billionaire's daughter prefers soul food to haute cuisine. From poverty to palace, the Cinderella story that has Italy talking." But it was the online comments that truly stung. The racist vitriol, the assumptions about her motives, the cruel speculation about her relationship with both Salvatore and Bianca. Reading them felt like being flayed alive. "I'm sorry," Salvatore said that evening, finding her in the garden where she'd retreated to think. "I should have anticipated this." "Should you have?" Zariah's voice was hollow. "Because I don't think anything could have prepared me for the things they're saying. The media always creates stories. They'll move on to something else soon." "Will they?" "Because according to these articles, I'm either a manipulative gold digger who's using a traumatized child to get to her rich father, or I'm some kind of magical Negro stereotype who exists solely to heal white people's pain." Salvatore winced at the raw pain in her voice. "You know that's not true. You know what you mean to us." "Do I?" "Because right now, I'm wondering if I made a mistake. If I've made everything worse for Bianca by being here. Bianca loves you. She needs you. She needs stability. She needs a father who can protect her from this kind of scrutiny. Maybe I should go back to America before this gets worse. You're not running away. We'll get through this together." But even as he said the words, Salvatore felt doubt creeping in. The board of directors at his fashion house had already called an emergency meeting. Several major investors had expressed concerns about his personal choices affecting the company's image. The woman he loved was being torn apart in the media, and he felt powerless to stop it. The crisis came to a head the following week, at the annual Milan Fashion Week Gala. Salvatore had initially planned to attend alone, but Zariah had surprised him by insisting they go together. "If we're going to be together, really together, then we can't hide," she said, zipping up the elegant black gown he'd bought her. "I won't be your secret. The press will be there. Every camera in Europe will be focused on us. Then let them look." Walking into that ballroom on Salvatore's arm was one of the most terrifying things Zariah had ever done. The moment they appeared in the doorway, a hush fell over the crowd. Then the whispers started, followed by the unmistakable sound of phone cameras clicking. But Salvatore held her hand tightly, his posture proud and protective. When reporters approached, he answered their questions with dignity and made it clear that Zariah was not a topic for gossip, but the woman he loved. "Miss Monroe," one particularly aggressive journalist called out, "what do you say to critics who claim you're taking advantage of a grieving widower and his traumatized daughter?" The question hit like a physical blow, but Zariah straightened her spine and met the reporter's gaze directly. "I'd say that love isn't always convenient or expected, but that doesn't make it less real. Bianca is thriving because she feels safe and cared for. That's all any child needs, adults who put her well-being first." "And the €1,000,000 reward? Did you ever collect it?" "No, and I never will. You can't put a price on family." The response went viral within hours. Videos of Zariah's poised, dignified answers circulated across social media, and public opinion began to shift. Comments flooded in from people praising her grace under pressure and her obvious love for Bianca. But the real validation came from an unexpected source. That night, as they returned to Lake Como, they found Bianca waiting up for them, her eyes bright with excitement. "I saw you on the computer," she announced. "You looked like a princess, Zariah, and Papa looked like a prince. Are you really going to get married?" Zariah glanced at Salvatore, who was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Would you like that?" Zariah asked the little girl. "More than anything. But only if you promise to keep making cornbread." "I think that can be arranged." Later, after Bianca was tucked into bed, Salvatore found Zariah on their favorite spot on the terrace. The lake stretched before them like black silk, dotted with lights from distant villas. "You were incredible tonight," he said, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "I was terrified." "You didn't show it." Zariah leaned back against his chest, drawing strength from his solid warmth. "I kept thinking about what my grandmama would say. She always told me that dignity is the one thing no one can take from you unless you give it away. Your grandmother raised an extraordinary woman. She'd have liked you, I think. She always said the measure of a man isn't what he has, but how he treats the people who can't do anything for him." Salvatore was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. "Marry me, Zariah." She turned in his arms, searching his face in the moonlight. "Salvatore, I know we've only known each other a few months. I know it seems fast, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. "I was going to plan something elaborate, but after tonight, after seeing how brave you were, I don't want to wait another day." The ring inside was stunning but not ostentatious, a perfect solitaire diamond surrounded by smaller stones that caught the moonlight like captured stars. "You brought love back into our lives, Zariah. You made us a family again. Now, make it official." Through tears of joy, she nodded. "Yes. Yes, of course, yes." Their wedding 6 months later was a celebration that bridged two worlds. Held in the villa's gardens overlooking Lake Como, it featured elements from both their cultures. Zariah wore her grandmother's pearls with her Italian-designed gown. The menu featured both Southern soul food and Northern Italian specialties. A gospel choir from Atlanta sang alongside an Italian string quartet. But the most precious moment came when Bianca, resplendent in a flower girl dress she'd helped design, stood between them during the ceremony and declared in a clear, strong voice, Now we're all a family for real." The years that followed brought challenges and changes, but their foundation remained solid. Zariah opened her own restaurant in Milan, Heart Soul, which became famous for its innovative fusion of Southern American and Northern Italian cuisines. Food critics called it revolutionary. Bianca called it home. The little girl grew into a confident, multilingual teenager who spoke fluent English with a slight Southern accent she'd picked up from her stepmother. She wrote a children's cookbook at age 12 titled Love in Every Bite, which became an international bestseller with proceeds going to organizations that fed hungry children worldwide. Salvatore learned to balance his business empire with his family responsibilities, often working from the villa and including Bianca in age-appropriate aspects of the fashion world. He discovered that being present for his daughter's life made him a better leader and a happier man. On a warm evening 5 years after their first meeting, the three of them sat around the kitchen table sharing a simple dinner of cornbread, black-eyed peas, and Bianca's latest culinary experiment, pasta with a sauce inspired by her stepmother's grandmother's recipe. "Mama Zariah," Bianca said, using the name she'd coined for her stepmother, "do you remember the first day you came here?" "Of course I do. You were so tiny and sad." "I wasn't sad because I was hungry for food. I was hungry for love." Zariah felt her eyes well up, as they always did when Bianca shared these moments of wisdom. "And now?" Salvatore asked his daughter. Bianca grinned, her face glowing with health and happiness. "Now I'm never hungry, because love tastes like everything good, and we have so much of it." As if summoned by the mention of more love, Zariah felt a familiar flutter in her belly. She placed her hand over the gentle swell that would soon become another Bellini child, a sibling who would grow up knowing that family isn't defined by blood or background, but by the people who choose to love you unconditionally. "Speaking of more love," she said, exchanging a meaningful glance with Salvatore. Bianca's eyes widened as understanding dawned. Am I going to—" "You're going to be a big sister," Salvatore confirmed, his voice thick with emotion. The teenager's squeal of joy could probably be heard across the lake. As she peppered them with questions about names and nurseries and whether she could teach the baby to cook, Zariah felt overwhelmed by gratitude. She'd come to Italy carrying nothing but a battered suitcase and her grandmother's cast-iron skillet. She'd found a broken family and somehow become the missing piece that made them whole. More importantly, she'd discovered that home isn't a place. It's the people who see your worth and choose to build a life with you. That night, after Bianca had finally fallen asleep despite her excitement, Zariah and Salvatore stood on their terrace overlooking the lake. The same view, the same moon, but everything had changed. "Do you ever think about that first day?" Salvatore asked, his arms wrapped around his wife from behind, his hands resting on their growing child. "Every day, I think about how scared I was, how impossible it all seemed." "And now?" Zariah smiled, leaning back against the man who'd become her anchor, surrounded by the love they'd built together. "Now I know that the best things in life aren't planned. They're prepared for, with an open heart, and received with grateful hands." Above them, stars reflected in the still water of Lake Como, and the future stretched ahead like a promise waiting to be fulfilled. They had built something beautiful from broken pieces, a blended family that proved love comes in many forms, and that sometimes the most unlikely combinations create the most extraordinary flavors. In the kitchen, a cast-iron skillet sat clean and ready for tomorrow's meals, a reminder that the simplest tools, wielded with love and intention, can create miracles that nourish both body and soul. Their love story had begun with a hungry child and a woman who knew how to cook with her heart. It had grown into something that fed an entire family's need for belonging, acceptance and unconditional love. And like all the best recipes, it would be passed down through generations, seasoned with memory and served with hope.